give a band a hand this morning, right? If you're online, you can do the holy hands. I don't know what they're called, some emoji. But so glad you guys are here. Quick question before we get started. How many of you, and if you're watching online, you can give a show, you can just give the thumbs up. But how many of you guys had unwritten rules in your home growing up? Like there was a chair that only your dad could sit in. Anyone have like that? Or when you're eating, there were certain rules like you had to. Maybe some of you was like you're religious and churchy. It's like, hey, we say grace before we eat. Anyone you have unwritten rules? Like no one talked about them, but they existed. Okay, and some of you heard me say this before, but in my house growing up, we had what I like to call the carpenter code. Now, my older brother made it up, who was a barbarian, but it was basically like, if someone ever does anything to you, make sure you pay them back 7 times what they did. And it was a terrible system because his 7 times could be basically just whatever he wanted to make it up. And I remember one time we were in his room. I said something to him, and I was like, I was just kind of messing around, and I just hit him in the arm. Not super hard, medium hard, right? So I go into the kitchen. I promise, go into our utility room and get hit in the back of the head with like a broomstick, right? And you look up and he's like, 7 times. I'm like, I think that was 20 times, right? But that was kind of that way for us. So there's unwritten rules and codes that people follow. And all of us have this. We have it in relationships. And for a lot of you here, you even had systems where it's like if you have children, or you were told this as kids, it was like basically simple rules of, hey, always be nice to people until they're not nice to you. Don't let somebody talk. All of us have these rules. I'll never let someone talk to me like that. So we have all these kind of unwritten rules that we live by. So this kind of series, and what I'm excited for, is we're going to talk about the 6 codes of C3. And I would normally just be like, okay, it's just some clever thing we tried to come up with. Who cares? Trent made it up. What's it matter? I would be honest with all of you. I'd sit in your seat right now, all of you, and be like, who cares? So Trent, this is something you and a couple of people made up. I do not care. The reason the 6 codes are important to me, though, is we're going to talk each week with a parable that Jesus taught. So a parable is simply a story that had a kingdom meaning. And that's why these 6 codes, how we operate at C3, are so important to me, because I think all 6 go back to this kingdom mindset that Jesus taught. He's like, hey, I'm bringing in the new kingdom. And the new kingdom has new rules. I'm changing everything. The games change, and this is how the new kingdom works. And he had to give us like examples and stories instead of just giving us rules and laws so we'd all be like, okay, check mark, check mark. He's no. I want you to understand the concept of the kingdom. So that's why I'm excited. So over the next 6 weeks, we want to hit these kind of Jesus parables, but each one has a kingdom concept that we want to operate out of, if that makes sense. I just wanted to give that disclaimer as we get started. And then I kind of have to set up this whole story, and I'll try to go as fast as possible. But why do we do this? So our purpose here at C3 is to help you find your purpose. One of my favorite verses is John 10:10. And in John 10:10, Jesus said, I've come that you in this room, you watching online, can have life and have it full and abundant and epic. That's the life I'm calling you and giving you to live. And those of you in here know just as well as I do, in the tri-state, most of the people I know are not living that epic life. They're not living an abundant life, a great eternal. They're not. We're not. It's a dark area. It's tough. So when we look at that, he's like, but the enemy wants to steal, kill, destroy. That's how he operates. But I came that you could have life and have it full and epic and abundant. So that's why we want to focus on all that we do. And with that, it kind of underlines these 6 codes we feel like build into that to help you and myself to live this epic life. So what's the first code? Okay, this is probably the biggest one at C3, the mainstay for the last 17 years. It's just stuck, it's just hung around. Most of the people I talk to, if I'm like, hey, what are we about? They can say this if they can say any of them, okay? And it says, we accept you wherever, underlined, you are, but care too much to let you stay there. Now, if I just made that up and you'd be like, oh, okay, that's a cool phrase, whatever, then we could probably just be like, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. But I believe there's a deeper meaning behind Jesus operating like this, and that's what I want to share with you today in Luke 10. But before we get there, I got to set up this story, okay? So when Jesus was speaking to a group, and he had a group of disciples or followers who were following him, okay? And there's anywhere between, really, there's 12 that were with him a lot. There were 3 that were kind of his inner circle, and then there were another 72 that were women and children were kind of followers, and then there's another group. Either way, he had kind of this group of followers. But as he was doing this stuff, he lived in a culture a Jewish culture. So I just got to set up this whole story, or else you're going to read it like I would through an American lens in 2023. So let me give you the backdrop. God created man and woman and people and animals, and then you fast forward several hundred years, and Abraham comes on the scene. And God creates a new contract or a covenant. It's basically just a contract with man. He said, Abraham, I'm going to use you to be the father of my people, the Jewish Israel nation. You're going to be my people. You're going to be my chosen people, literally like my favorites, okay? So the Jewish people had it going on for hundreds of years. Now, this is where the story gets interesting, though. The Jewish culture also had, God gave them, they felt truly from God, the 10 Commandments or the 10 laws they lived by. 4 of those focus on the relationship with God, and 6 focus on how to live well with others and to honor God and with others, okay? So that was kind of the 10. Then they had another 613 laws that they were to follow through Deuteronomy, Leviticus, and the first books of the Bible, okay? So that's where they're at. But here was kind of the issue for them. If you would talk to a good Jewish boy or girl, here's what they would say their code is. I accept you as long as you are also a good Jewish boy or girl. And I care too much about you to let you hang out with people who are not like us. Okay? That was literally what they felt like God. They honored God by living a life that said we separate ourselves. Okay? I accept you as long as you're like me and we both believe and we're both Jewish and we're of the same nation and we're Israelites. I accept you. And I care way too much about you to let you hang out with other people like the Gentiles and the Samaritans. They're the worst. Okay? That was their mindset. And they truly thought they were honoring God by doing that. They were keeping in their mind the law. Okay, so I say that because I think this story has to kind of build into that a little bit. So what happens? And why is this important to us? Some of you are like, okay, Trina, I get it, but I'm not Jewish, so what's it matter? Because I think we do the exact same thing. You see, we create boundaries. All of us here, we do. We create boundaries, and what we want is we want God to love us unconditionally. But when it comes to us loving other people, we're like, okay, God, what's the conditions? What are the conditions for me to love you? God, I want you to forgive me through all my nonsense. But when it comes to them wronging me, God, there's got to be a limit. You see, I want unlimited love from God, but limited love towards you. Because that's the way I think, and that's the way that this Jewish culture felt the same. So what the first thing is, I think is important, is we want to draw a line in the sand. We want to establish by God, who am I supposed to truly love? God, do you mean, like Trent, when you just said we accept you wherever, do you mean really wherever? Do you mean people that think differently than us, who vote differently than us, who have different lifestyles than us? Trent, are you saying, I don't know if I agree with that. I don't even think that's right. Okay, fair enough. What do we really mean by this? Because we want to draw a line in the sand. We want to define the minimum amount of the people we truly have to love to follow Jesus. So this is what happened. Luke 10, verse 25. It says, one day an expert of the religious law, an expert, okay, stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question. Teacher, what should I do? Remember we said a couple weeks ago, the law is all about what I do. The gospel is all about what he did. What should I do to inherit eternal life? Now, just to give you a real quick another backdrop, because this is funny. Jesus, in the last 3 years of his life, now imagine being Jesus. The religious leaders would pay top dollar to the smartest, best lawyers, religious minds of the day, and they would be paid to spy on Jesus. And they would constantly pop up when he was teaching or doing something, and they'd say, hey, teacher, what do you think? They had loaded questions every day because they truly didn't believe that he was the Messiah. Now, here's the issue they had with him. How could Jesus claim to be God in the flesh, and yet he hangs out with non-Jewish people? Not only does he hang out with non-Jewish people and Samaritans, and not only does he hang out with tax collectors who sold us out, but he not only hangs out with them, he likes them. And they like him. God, we have a problem with that because we know by following your law, we should never like people like that. We're holy by who we separate from. And now you're seeing Jesus hang out with these people? So this was the test to him. He's like, what should I do to inherit your life? Jesus replied, what does the law of Moses say? Okay, we'll play the law game here. What's it say? How do you read it? The man was very intelligent. He answered, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right. Jesus like, yes, I will agree with you. All of the law, all 613 plus the 10 can be summarized by loving God vertically and loving people horizontally. Now get what he says though. He says, do this and you will live. The man had another motive though. And he wanted to justify the whole reason he's asking this question. He's like, okay, Jesus, so we're on the same page, right? Yes, okay. Love God, love others. But Jesus, who is my neighbor? And the man asked this question because this man knew Leviticus. Leviticus 19:18. Pop it up here. He knew. This was the verse. This was the law they lived by. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite. You see, God's telling us there, don't hold a grudge or hurt other Israelites. Why? He says it right here. But love your neighbor. So this whole culture was like, we get it. We're supposed to love our neighbor. But our neighbor is other Jewish people. God, you're surely not saying that our neighbor is other people than that. It can't be. That just feels so wrong and sinful. There's no way a good God is asking us to love people who are not Jewish. That was their struggle. They're like, there's no way you want us to like these other people. And that brings me to the second and final point. Jesus always crossed the line. Do you know that? You see, we do the same thing. What we want to do is we want to create boundaries and rules and justifications. Why? Because we want to know who's in and out. We want to know if we're doing the same thing, if we're together. You can go down the line. Whatever reason, we create these lines, and Jesus was constantly crossing them. Constantly. That's how he operated. Now, here's the crazy part of this whole story. And some of you have little kids, you know this. I have a son and daughter, both seniors, right? My son is the kid who, like, he's a rule follower. If you tell him, hey, we're starting at 6 o'clock, he's like, okay, I'll be home 5:55. Like, he's that guy, right? My daughter should have been born in the 60s, flower child hippie. Like, she just schedules everything. That's just made up in her world. And she was like that as a kid. If you went somewhere when both my kids were really little, if you went somewhere, if I was in a store, I'm like, where's Tayden? He's right by my hip, right? Hey, Dad, where are we going? You know, he was that kid. But Tegan wandered all the time. My daughter, she wandered everywhere. I told my wife, I was like, she's the most amazing person. I can blink, and literally she can be 4 miles away. Like she's going all the time. Well, the Jewish people had a problem with Jesus because they're like, no, we created the rules. These are our people. We all hang out together. And every time they look, Jesus is over there with a group of people that's nothing like them. And they're like, no, Jesus, you can't do that. That's not godly. How can you claim to be God and you do such ungodly stuff? And Jesus like, no, like we said in the song, I'm changing everything. I want you to hear this quote. When religious people use the law of God to hurt people made in the image of God, Jesus was always quick to remind them they're on the wrong side of God. Let me say that again. When religious people use the law of God to hurt people made in the image of God, I'm just saying, read through the Gospels. Jesus was always the first one to say, no, I think you're actually on the wrong side of what God's really about. That wasn't how he worked. So let's keep going with the story. Jesus said, okay, so you want to know who the neighbor is? I'll tell you a story. And here's the story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him up, and they left him half dead beside the road. Now, as Jesus was telling this story, you had, I don't know if it was a large group, small group, but all the Jewish people hearing this would have been like, oh, why did he go to Jericho, right? We know streets in the tri-state right now. I could say certain streets or avenues, and if I say that, you're like, better be careful, right? Those of you watching online, you notice if I said, hey, don't head in Ironton on Cairn Street. That's where I live. It's rough, okay? You better come packing. You better bring several cops if you come in my hood. Right? No, it's actually a bunch of old people, and half of them are dying off, so it's no. But we know there's places in tri-state. All of you know that. You're like, yes. If I say a certain name, if I say South Central LA, you're like, that doesn't sound, it may even be safe, but in our minds, like, that's not. When he said this Jericho Road, they're like, why was he going there? That's the worst place around. But then he says this, he said, hey, this Jewish guy got beat up, left basically for dead. Everyone in that crowd, I promise you, was like, probably a Samaritan. They're the worst. You see, the Jews, I guess the best way to describe it modern day would be like institutionalized racism. They literally thought Samaritans are less than us. God loves us. He doesn't love them. They're not worthy of God's love. So we can mistreat them. Why? Because they're literally a people groups not as good as we are. We don't like them. They even had a term for them. They called them half-breeds because they were half Gentile and half Jewish. So they hated the Samaritans. Okay? He says, so here's what happened. By chance, a priest came on. So like, finally, a hero of the story. A Jewish priest. He'll save the day. This guy shouldn't have been doing it, but surely the priest will save the day. Look what he says. But when he saw the man lying there, he crossed the other side of the road and passed by him. A temple assistant, a Levite, walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Now remember the original question, but who is my neighbor? Now I love this part. Jesus says, then a despised Samaritan, and at that point the whole crowd would be like, oh, now he's really getting killed, right? If there's anything left, the Samaritan's going to steal it from him, and then he's probably going to fully make sure, he's probably going to cut his throat. That was their mindset. Look what Jesus does and how he flips it. The Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn or a hotel where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. If it runs higher than this bill, let me know. I'll pay you the next time that I'm here. Now at that point, I'm telling you guys, none of you felt it in here. You know why? Samaritan's positive in our culture. Hey, that guy must be a good Samaritan. Hey, have you ever been to Good Samaritan Hospital? Hey, there's just another good Samaritan. But when these guys heard that story, these men and women, they're like, he went too far. You actually picked the person we hate and made him the hero of this story. Now they're probably, in that moment, there was religious leaders probably clenching their fists, gritting their teeth. They're like, no, you don't do that because we hate those people. Why do we hate them? Because we know God doesn't love them either. That's how it works. I was watching the Super Bowl last week, and I was with my brothers, my mom and dad. We're at their house, and we're watching. And I used to love, of course, love football, but I used to love commercials. I don't know if I'm getting old. Maybe I'm out of touch. I don't know what anything means anymore. But to me, commercials are like, haven't been great last several years. But we're sitting there watching the Super Bowl, and there was one commercial that came on, just one. There's this new big push that he gets this movement, and some people love it, people are arguing, they hate it, whatever, it doesn't matter. But in the middle of that, one of my brothers is talking to me, probably telling me something crazy and dirty that I don't need to be listened to anyways. And about that time, this commercial comes on, and it caught my attention. Here was the commercial.
What a wonderful world this would be. There'd be no trouble.
Now, everyone, watched it and said, oh, okay, it's good, whatever. But here's the thing. I drove home that night, and I just kept thinking about this concept. And I think this story builds into this. Jesus said, in my kingdom, he said, actually, you need to enter in my kingdom like a child. So I started thinking about the different ways all of you in this room have a choice to live your life from this day to the end of your days. We can be adults. What do adults do? See, adults have lived the life. We've been burnt. We've tried to help only to be used. We've tried to do the right thing only for it to blow up in our face. So what we do as adults, we become guarded. We become completely guarded. We're like, no, I know. I can pull and stop at the red light in Ashland, and the guy holding the sign, I'm like, he probably makes more money than I do during the week, right? Because we've all been burnt. Adults are very guarded. But then there's another side where it's just childish. You see, childish for all of us is what happens is we become very greedy, and we really hold grudges. We get mad. We throw fits because we're not getting our way. And Jesus said, but there's a third way to live your life, and it's to be childlike. And if you guys know, any of you have little kids, you know this. Kids will fight, and they'll get mad, and they'll be selfish. But then the next day when you go talk to them, it's like all is over, right? I used to know some of you agree or disagree. But I remember my son, back when he was little, he would do something. So when I would go to spank him, and it really is, people say whatever they want, I would always try to be very calm, never angry, explain what happened, go through the process. That probably was worse for him than anything. But I remember every time I did that, I was like, I bet you he'll hate me. He has to hate me. I hate doing this. You know what happened 3 seconds later? Hey, Dad, want to pass football? Yeah, right? Like there's this childlike mentality. It's like, I don't hold grudges. I'm not jaded by the world. We simply love. As we approach the kingdom, it's being childlike. Childlike, that's how it works for so many of us, to be childlike. So this is where the rubber meets the road today. I want you to hear this. How do we accept everyone, wherever they are, but care too much to let them stay there? I think we have to go with what this guy actually did. And this is my challenge to you for this week, okay? We want to become a people who see a need and meet it. A people who know the price and pay it. And most importantly, a people that don't talk ourselves out of it. Because if you're anything like me, I can be an adult, I can be guarded, I can say, no, I got this, and it's just common sense and go down the line. But what happens is, I become just like the priest and the Levite who say, well, he shouldn't have been doing it. It's probably his fault anyways. He might be faking. He might be there to take advantage of me more. But Jesus said, no. I want you to be a group of people who see a need, and you meet it. Who know the price. He said, hey, here's 2 silver coins. I'll give you more. Truly childlike. Why? Now, I can say this. I didn't say it in the first service. I think both of my brothers are here. My brothers are knuckleheads, okay? I'm the only good one in my family. I mean, I'm serious. Like, my mom and dad, like, 1 out of 3 is not bad, right? But here's what I'll say. They've done a lot of stuff. My older brother tortured me, all these things. And it goes back to this childlike. But I remember even being as a kid, you'd be fighting, angry. But I remember anytime the neighbor came and said something, it's like, no, you don't talk. Right? Because they're your brothers. They're your brothers. That trumps everything. That trumps everything from anybody. You can be my best friend. And I've even had people say something before. I'm like, you can say whatever you want, but you don't talk about my wife, my kids, or my brothers. Right? My immediate family. And I look at this guy and every other person, and I think that's why I love the Martin Luther King quote. Here's what he said. He said, the first question the priest and Levi asked was, if I stop to help this man, what's going to happen to me? He says, but the Samaritan actually reversed the question and said, if I don't stop, what will happen to him? See, there's great power in that, in making that decision. So last 2 verses, we'll finish the story. Jesus said, now, which of these 3? You have your hero, the priest, you have the Levite, the temple assistant, and you have a despised Samaritan. And he asked the guy, he says, which one of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? The man replied, he hated this group so much, literally hated them so much, he would not even say the name. He didn't even want the word Samaritan to come out of his lips. So what's he say? He's like, he probably mumbled it. He's like, the one. What? Jesus like, what did you say? The one that showed mercy. Now look what Jesus says. Jesus says, yes, now go and do the same. So this morning, I want to kind of explain to you how Jesus, he told a parable, accept you wherever you are, care too much, let you stay there. And then Jesus lived this out. I want to share with you how Jesus lived this out, and then I'm going to pray, and we're out of here. Now, I'm trying to be real careful because I was in a small group last week, and some of you are in this room, and you know what you said. And they're like, I just don't like when you said, one person said this, they're like, one time you said it was going to be 5 minutes, and it was 8 minutes. I was like, you shut your mouth, okay? I'll go 15 next time. We going to do this now? Right. So I won't give you any time, but I'm going to tell you, I want to tell one example of how Jesus lived this out. I'm going to pray. Promise you. There's a story in John chapter 8. Again, same story. A group of religious people are like, there's no way he can be the Messiah, the Son of God, because he hangs around with scum. And that's not even the worst part. I could get if he was some charity case, but it's not that. He's friends with them. They like him. They actually walk down the street and say, hey, Jesus, and he waves back. He's at their house sharing meals. He's hanging out with them. There's no way God in the flesh would do that. He's too holy for that. So they had to trip him up. So again, they started hiring all these people to catch him up. Well, they come up with this elaborate plan. Some of you know this story, but I think it's so powerful. They're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We know this lady in the town lives a little fast and a little loose, and I'm sure they knew at certain times when her husband's at work or whatever, this is when this happens. But they catch a woman in the middle of cheating, either with her husband or with another husband. And Jesus is in the middle of the day teaching, just literally talking to his followers and other Jewish people. And they take a woman and they throw her literally in front of him. Maybe completely naked, maybe half naked, who knows? Ashamed, embarrassed. And they're so excited because they don't care about this woman. They don't care about the other guy who's involved. They literally just want to prove their rules are good. And they look at him and say, what does the law say? You said you didn't come to break the law, but to fulfill. What's the law say? Moses says, anyone caught in adultery deserves to be stoned to death. They are so excited because now he has to make a choice. He either has to look at them and say, you're right, and I'm not going to follow the law. Or he has to say, okay, let's kill her then. They know they've got him. The Bible says that Jesus, and those you know the story, he stoops down, he writes something in the sand, because he was always drawing lines and crossing, but whatever he writes, and the story, real fast, is, it says the oldest from the youngest who brought her in front of Jesus. Oldest to the youngest walk away. They one by one drop their rocks and they walk away. Now here's where I think the power of that story is. Here's a woman so ashamed. She probably was praying they would kill her because it's so embarrassing at this point. She's ashamed. She doesn't want everyone stared at her like it would be the most horrific thing for a female to go through. And it says Jesus looks up at her. He's down on a knee. He stooped down to her level and he looks up at her. And he says, where are the men that judged you? Where are the men that condemned you? And she said, there's none left. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. Every single one of those guys wanted to judge her by being holy, yet they couldn't. And she's actually making eye contact with the one person on earth who can judge her completely. So every guy wanted to judge her, but he couldn't. And the one guy who could judge her didn't want to. Because he looks her in the eye and he says, neither do I judge you. Neither do I condemn you. And he says something. He says, now go and sin no more. Now, if you grew up with like a Baptist edge, like I did, then what we run with that story is we're like, and that's what it means. You quit your sinning, you stop right now, you get, and maybe so, I don't know. But I really believe, I think Jesus was saying, you're not this person. I want so much more for you in your life than what you think your shame, your guilt, your past. In that moment, she's like, this has to be too good to be true. And he's like, it is. It's called the gospel. That's the good news, is you are incredibly valuable in my eyes. So as we talk about our code today, as we wrap up, not only do I believe this story, Jesus said, hey, you know who your neighbor is? Whoever has a need. You know who your neighbor is? Whoever God puts in your path that day. But God, what? You know that lady at work. You know how much she gets on my nerves. You know how weird she is. Please don't make me talk to her. She's your neighbor. You see, Jesus opened up and said, everyone now is your neighbor. Anyone you come in contact with is actually your neighbor. And to be a great neighbor, all you've got to do is love them the way that I loved you. How do you do that? I see a need, then I try to meet it. I know the price is going to cost me, yet I still pay it. And I never talk myself out of it. That's the beauty of this life Jesus has called us to live. That's how we accept others, but care too much to let them stay there. And Jesus proved that because he looked at the woman and said, neither do I. I accept you exactly where you are right now. But when you leave and you get to make whatever choices you want, I want you to know I love you more than you could ever imagine. And you don't have to live this way. That's what I believe the message is. So today as we get ready to pray, here's what I want you to do. If you would just close your eyes for just a second. And I want to talk to some people here. Before we pray, and you just keep your head down for just a second. You don't have to look up in this moment, but I get a lot of the backstories in this church. I could tell you some this morning that would literally devastate so many of you in this room. People who have been taken advantage of. People who have made some terrible choices. A lot of people who don't even feel like God truly would love them because they know what they've done or what's been done to them. If that's you this morning, if that's you watching online, I want you to know that Jesus would get down on your level. He'd look you right in the eyes. And he would say, no one can judge you except me. And here's the good news. I don't. I want so much more for you. I came that you could have an abundant life, an epic life, a life worth truly living. Why? Because my kingdom is now on earth. This movement has already started, and it continues today. So if nothing else, if that's you, I pray if nothing else, your mindset can shift to how God truly sees you today. And for some of you, it's nothing like you think. It's not the way your parents saw you, teachers saw you, boyfriends saw you, girlfriends saw you. It's better than you could ever imagine. And I pray today for someone here that realizes the true Jesus, the way he feels about you. And today's the day for you to make a radical decision to put your trust in him. And you're going to do this by saying a prayer, something like this. Jesus, I know I've sinned. I know I've messed up. But I'm asking you today to forgive me. Give me new life in you. Now, before we get ready to close and before you look up, I'm going to challenge you to do something really bold. If you did that for the first time online, go to the hub, give me a thumbs up, email us at staff@LNC3. But if you're in this room right now and you did that, I'm going to challenge you to do something. No one's looking around. I'm going to challenge you, if you would, if you took that step today, just to raise your hand, just until I acknowledge. I don't know your name. I'm not going to call you out, but I just want to acknowledge I see your hand. If that's you, just raise it up. Just hold it till I acknowledge it so we can celebrate today. Because the Bible tells me all the angels in heaven celebrate about your decision today. If that's you, just hold it up. Just hold it till I acknowledge you. You can put it back down. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Jesus, so thankful for the lives you continue to change. So thankful for how you move. So thankful for who you are. Help us today as we walk out of these doors to live and love others like you did. We ask these things in your name, and amen. All right, guys, have a great week. We'll see you next week for week 2 of the Code. Take care. Huh?